The dust cloud rising from Prairie Dawn's main street could be seen for miles across the Wyoming Territory, kicked up by 57 pairs of boots and hooves pounding the hardpan earth in murderous pursuit. 18-year-old Nellie Hart stumbled as she ran, her blue calico dress torn at the shoulder where Bitter Sam had grabbed her minutes earlier at the Kane Ranch house. Blood from rope burns circled her wrists like crimson bracelets, and her father's pearl-handled derringer trembled in her grip. Behind her, the mob swelled with each passing block. Aldrich Kane led the charge on his bay stallion, his 38 years evident in the gray, threading his black beard, but his fury propelled him faster than men half his age. The rancher's usually pristine white shirt was soaked with sweat, his pressed trousers coated with alkali dust, yet his pale gray eyes burned with the calculating rage of a man whose empire was crumbling. Eleanor. Kane's voice cracked like a whip across the morning air. You've stolen my children. That Eastern girl's gone mad. She's dangerous to everyone. Sheriff Glasseye. Joe spurred his roan mare alongside Kane's gelding, his empty left socket gaping beneath his hat brim like a wound that never healed. A Comanche war lance had claimed the eye during a raid 4 years prior, leaving him with permanent pain that had curdled his soul. His remaining good eye fixed on Nellie with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. Won't make it 2 blocks in this heat. He called his voice, carrying the authority of a badge, and the cruelty of a man who'd learned that fear worked better than justice. Not carrying young ones. But Nellie carried no children. Martha and Victor Kane remained hidden in the ranch house root cellar, where she'd left them 20 minutes ago with her last piece of hardtack and whispered promises of rescue. The kidnapping lie was just another strand in the web of deception that had trapped her in this scorched corner of hell. A war cry split the dusty chaos, not the shriek of attack, but the controlled shout of intervention. Chaska, a Lakota warrior of 25 summers, burst from the crowd outside Murphy's saloon. His chest bore fresh blue and white geometric patterns painted that morning for a tribal council meeting about treaty violations. Eagle feathers adorned his black hair, marking his status, though he'd ridden to Prairie Dawn, seeking peace, not war. His dark eyes found Nellie's across the melee, and recognition flashed between them like lightning striking twice in the same place. She was William Hart's daughter-child of the fair-dealing trader who'd shared honest coffee and conversation with Chaska's band for over a decade. The debt was clear and binding. Without hesitation, Chaska raised his palm and pointed left, his lips forming alley, though his voice was lost in the chaos. Nellie cut sharply between Thornton's mercantile and Henderson's blacksmith shop, her worn boots finding purchase on ground baked harder than pottery. A hemp lariat whistled over her shoulder, missing by inches, and striking the earth with a sound like a gunshot. "Block them," Chaska commanded in English, and then repeated in Lakota to his cousin, who stepped into Bitter Sam's path. Glass-eyed Joe raised his Winchester Model 1873, swinging the walnut stock toward Chaska's skull. The warrior ducked and drove his shoulder against a rain barrel positioned beneath the mercantile's tin gutter. Water from yesterday's brief storm exploded outward, sending townsmen stumbling as their boots lost grip on the suddenly slick boardwalk. Nellie pressed herself against the blue-painted rear wall of the general store, her back against sun-warmed wood. Her lungs burned with each ragged breath, and her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged animal. Seconds later, Chaska landed beside her in a controlled crouch, his chest rising and falling with the measured rhythm of someone who'd learned to master fear through discipline. Their eyes met in the narrow space, and she saw something that steadied her panic absolute competence, married to unwavering determination. "Hurt?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet." She managed through a throat dry as desert sand. The jailhouse bell began its frantic clanging, summoning every able-bodied man to join the sheriff's expanding posse. Boot heels thundered on the main street yards, a way accompanied by shouted orders that grew more organized by the minute. In their hiding spot, Nellie became aware of Chaska's controlled breathing. Without conscious thought, she began matching his rhythm 4 counts and 4 counts out. The panic that had driven her desperate flight slowly ebbed, replaced by something steadier. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. "Your father pulled my nephew from Mud Creek 5 summers past." Chaska replied simply, "Boy would have drowned. Good man. Debt of honor." But as their breathing synchronized and immediate danger forced absolute trust between them, both understood that something deeper than obligation sparked this alliance. The protective way he'd positioned himself, the flash of anger in his eyes when he'd seen her bloodied wrists. These spoke to impulses that transcended duty. Heavy boots scraped at the alley's entrance. They both tensed weapons ready. Through a crack in the weathered siding, Nellie could see massive Mark's bulk blocking the afternoon light as he peered into their sanctuary, his pig-like eyes searching shadows. Chaska's hand found her wrist, steadying, not restraining. His calloused palm covered the rope burns, and the tremor in her gun hand disappeared. For 30 heartbeats that felt like hours, they remained frozen, while Mark grunted and searched. Finally, apparently convinced the alley held nothing but refuse, the giant moved toward the church. But both fugitives understood this was merely the first wave of what would be a systematic hunt. "They'll keep coming," Nellie stated. Chaska nodded grimly. "Then we stay ahead." The full weight of her situation crashed down like a physical blow. She was legally married to a man who'd coerced her signature through violence and threats, witnessed by corrupt officials in a territory where women had fewer rights than cattle. Her father's most valuable inheritance water rights, that could make or break every ranch within 50 miles, now belonged to Aldrich Kane through frontier marriage laws that made her little more than property. But pressed against the blue wall with a Lakota warrior's steady presence beside her, she felt something she hadn't experienced since stepping off the westbound stage, the possibility of survival with her soul intact. The bell continued its insistent tolling, while male voices organized into search patterns with military precision. Glass-eyed Joe's experience in territorial campaigns showed in how methodically he deployed his forces. "When I move..." Chaska breathed against her ear, stirring loose strands of hair that had escaped her bun. "You run toward the creek. Don't look back." "What about you?" "I'll buy time." The words carried implications that tightened her throat with unexpected emotion. This stranger was prepared to sacrifice himself for her freedom, based on nothing more than an old debt to her father. "No," she whispered, surprising herself with her firmness. "Together or not at all." For the first time since their eyes had met across the chaotic street, Chaska smiled, a slight expression that transformed his stern features into something warmer and infinitely more human. "Together, then," he agreed, and something in his tone suggested the word carried deeper meaning than tactical cooperation. Set up. June 1st to July 17th, 1880. 6 weeks earlier, Nellie Hart had stepped off the westbound overland stage with 2 leather trunks, a carpet bag containing her mother's jewelry, and a sealed envelope bearing the territorial seal. Inside lay her deceased father's deed to water rights for Mud Creek, the only year-round water source in a region where drought could transform prosperity into bankruptcy in a single season. The stage was 3 days late due to a washed-out bridge near Fort Collins, and Nellie's traveling dress was wrinkled beyond salvation, despite her efforts with a flat iron heated on a stove at the hotel in Cheyenne. She'd expected to find lodging at Prairie Dawn's boarding house while arranging her affairs, but Aldrich Kane had different plans. The rancher waited beside the depot platform with Reverend Phillips and a hastily prepared marriage document spread across freight crates serving as a makeshift table. Glass-eyed Joe lounged in the shade, his badge catching late afternoon sun as he provided official witness to proceedings that would have been criminal in any jurisdiction with functioning courts. "Miss Hart," Kane said, removing his hat with practiced courtesy that never reached his pale eyes. "William Hart spoke of you during our business dealings. Tragic loss, his passing. Under prior appropriation doctrine governing Western water law, controlling Mud Creek meant controlling the economic lifeblood of every ranch, mine, and settlement within a day's ride. Her father had secured those rights through legal filing, physical improvement of the water source, and beneficial use dating back 15 years. Now with railroad expansion and mining operations multiplying in the Sand Hill District, Mud Creek access commanded premium prices from desperate customers. The wedding ceremony lasted 8 minutes by the depot's prominent clock. Nellie's voice remained barely audible as she spoke vows that seemed to echo from someone else's throat, nearly drowned by cattle lowing in stock cars 50 yards away. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Phillips intoned with mechanical precision, "we are gathered in God's sight to join this man and woman in holy matrimony." The words blurred like watercolors in rain. When Phillips asked if she took Aldrich Kane as her lawfully wedded husband, silence stretched long enough for a tumbleweed to roll completely across the loading area. She began, and then stopped as Glass-Eye Joe's hand moved deliberately to his gun belt, not drawing, just reminding her of consequences. "I do," she whispered. Kane's Rocking K Ranch occupied a valley 12 miles southeast of Prairie Dawn, accessible only by a wagon road, winding through badlands so desolate they seemed imported from another planet. The ranch house was substantial 2 stories of squared timber and native stone, speaking of prosperity earned through careful planning and ruthless execution. Kane showed her to a cramped room off the kitchen, barely large enough for a narrow bed and pine washstand. The single window overlooked the main corral, where hands broke horses with casual brutality that made her wince. "Your belongings remain in the barn," Kane informed her, with the tone he'd used to discuss feed prices. "Weather's unpredictable. Safer there." Daily routine began before dawn, with exhaustive chores recorded in Kane's leather-bound ledger. Nellie scrubbed floors with lye soap that left her hands raw-tended chickens that seemed personally offended by her Eastern origins, and prepared meals according to precise portions, accounting for every grain of salt. Kane's children from his first marriage observed with the wary intelligence of young animals who'd learned survival depended on reading adult moods. 10-year-old Martha possessed her late mother's auburn hair and her father's calculating gray eyes, while 7-year-old Victor clung to his sister's shadow with desperate intensity. Both children bore the hollow-cheeked appearance of chronic hunger despite living on an apparently prosperous ranch. Martha would slip extra biscuit crumbs to Victor when their father wasn't watching, both eyeing Nellie's meager portions with poorly concealed longing. Corruption had ensnared Nellie, but it wasn't universal. Charles Whitcomb operated his clinic behind the barber shop, with quiet competence learned during the war between the states. His fees remained modest, his conscience intact, despite numerous opportunities for compromise. When Whitcomb visited to treat a cowhand's broken arm, he slipped Nellie a wrapped biscuit while Kane discussed payment in the yard. "You look peaked, Mrs. Kane," he said quietly, his voice carrying professional authority. "Frontier life's hard enough without fighting it hungry." Miss Lavinia Pike taught school in a converted room beside the Methodist church, her sharp features and intelligence concealed by whispered speech patterns adopted for public appearances. Few knew she'd maintained correspondence with William Hart for 3 years, their letters discussing territorial politics and educational philosophy. Hart had funded the school partly from philanthropy, but also to ensure his daughter would have at least one ally when she arrived. Lavinia's silence during the forced wedding was pragmatic. She was gathering information and waiting for the right moment. Fergus O'Rourke delivered Hay twice weekly, his Irish accent thick, despite 20 years in America. The small farmer struggled on rocky soil better suited to growing stones than crops, but his character remained solid as bedrock. During one delivery, he caught Nellie staring toward the eastern horizon, where the stage route disappeared into heat haze. "You need help, lass," he said while loading bales. "You holler loud. These old ears work fine, and I've got friends who remember honor." The most significant connection began at the community well behind Thornton's Mercantile. Nellie had walked to town for supplies, flour salt and lamp oil per Kane's itemized list, carrying a wooden bucket predating statehood. The bucket's rope handle snapped as she drew water, sending the container tumbling 20 feet with a splash that echoed like a gunshot. Tears she'd held back for weeks threatened to overwhelm her. "Easy, does it?" said a calm voice behind her. "No harm done?" She turned to find Chaska lowering a rawhide lariat with practiced ease. His English carried the precise cadence of formal education rather than casual frontier acquisition, and his dark eyes held steady confidence. "Thank you," she managed, accepting the retrieved bucket with trembling hands. "Hart," he said, recognizing her surname from years of trading relationships. "Good family. Honest dealings." Their eyes met longer than social convention required, and she glimpsed something she'd nearly forgotten respect offered without conditions or calculations. Chaska's Lakota band maintained winter grazing rights on hills above Mud Creek under 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty provisions. The arrangement functioned smoothly through her father's fair dealing and the band's careful stewardship. They rotated horse herds through different areas, preventing overgrazing while maintaining creek banks through traditional methods that improved water flow. Prairie Dawn's landscape reflected high plains realities with unforgiving clarity. Summer temperatures exceeded 100 degrees, while winter blizzards dropped visibility to 0 and temperatures to 40 below. Water remained more precious than gold, more essential than ammunition, more fought over than honor. Mud Creek flowed year-round, thanks to deep bedrock springs, but volume fluctuated dramatically with seasonal rainfall and mountain snowmelt. During drought years, it dwindled to a trickle barely sufficient for basic needs, making control literally a matter of life and death. Walking back to Kane's ranch that first afternoon, bucket properly balanced despite her earlier mishap, Nellie began understanding her situation's true dimensions. Her marriage wasn't about companionship or convenience. It was a calculated business transaction, transferring her father's most valuable asset to a man who'd never earned it. The knowledge settled like broken glass in her stomach, but alongside despair, something else took root. Memory of respectful brown eyes and strong hands offering help without expecting payment. Promise of an Irish farmer pledging to hear her call. Quiet competence of a doctor who recognized hunger and acted accordingly. Not everyone in Prairie Dawn was corrupt. Perhaps with courage, planning, and considerable luck, that might be enough. But first, she needed to survive long enough to find out. Inciting incident, July 15th, 1880. The discovery came while Nellie swept Kane's ranch house during afternoon heat, so intense even flies sought shade. Her broom caught on something metallic between the heavy oak desk and a small tin strongbox that had slipped from its hiding place. She glanced toward the porch where Kane discussed cattle prices with his foreman, their voices carrying through windows opened for any breath of moving air. With trembling fingers, she pried the box free and lifted its hinged lid. Their marriage certificate lay on top, signed in her shaking handwriting 6 weeks earlier. Beneath it was a formal contract between Aldrich Kane and Victor Pine, president of Prairie Dawn's Cattlemen's Bank. The language was precise and legally binding. Upon successful marriage to Miss Eleanor Hart and subsequent transfer of water rights through territorial matrimonial property statutes, Aldrich Kane agrees to provide Victor Pine exclusive commercial access to Mud Creek waters for 25 years in exchange for complete debt forgiveness and equal partnership in all resulting revenue streams. Her hands shook as she absorbed the implications. Kane owed nearly $4,000 more than most frontier families would see in a lifetime. Her father's water rights were collateral in a scheme that would make her inheritance worthless, even if she remained legally married. A handwritten note in Kane's script: Hart deed relocated to bank vault. Territorial recorder bribed $200. Sheriff compensated $150 monthly. Preacher paid standard $50 discretionary fee. She closed the box carefully and resumed sweeping, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. Kane's sudden courtship, the rushed ceremony preventing legal consultation. Glass-eyed Joe's threatening presence, she'd been married as an unwilling participant in elaborate theft. That evening, Kane announced his plans over their usual meager supper. Fence crew arrives tomorrow morning, he said, cutting his portion with mechanical precision. Entire creek perimeter enclosed by week's end. Fenced? Nellie asked, though dread provided the answer. Access fees, Kane replied without looking up. Every rancher, miner, and squatter pays according to usage. Standard rate 75 cents per head, daily mining operations charged by volume. The amounts were staggering enough to bankrupt smaller operations within a month, force larger ones into Kane's debt within a season. But the treaty guarantees Lakota grazing access, she protested. They've used those waters for generations. Kane's pale eyes fixed on her with cold amusement. Treaties are paper, Mrs. Kane. Water is reality, and you do well remembering you're a wife, not a partner. These decisions aren't yours to question. When she opened her mouth to argue, his hand moved like a striking snake. The slap rang sharp and clear, snapping her head sideways, hard enough to wring her ear and leave blood on her tongue. Martha gasped from the corner, where she and Victor huddled over rationed portions. Both had learned to become invisible during their father's rages. But this time, Martha's protective instincts overrode caution. Papa, please don't hurt her, she whispered, voice carrying desperate familiarity with similar pleas. Kane turned his cold stare on his daughter. Children speak when spoken to, Martha. Perhaps you need reminding of proper behavior. Victor began crying silently, tears streaming down thin cheeks as he pressed closer to his sister. Nellie felt something crystallize in her chest, not just anger at her mistreatment, but fury at how Kane terrorized children dependent on him. Don't you dare touch them, she said quietly, voice carrying new steel that made Kane's eyes narrow. For a moment, the room balanced on violence's edge. Kane's hand moved toward the leather strap beside the stove, while Nellie's fingers found the carving knife she'd used on their bread. Children held their breath, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled loneliness to the darkening sky. Then Kane smiled, cold expression, never touching his eyes. You're developing opinions, Mrs. Kane. That could prove unfortunate. That night, after Kane's snores echoed from the main bedroom, Nellie crept to the barn, where she'd hidden the children during their father's latest drinking bout. She found Martha and Victor huddled in an empty stall, sharing a threadbare blanket and gnawing dried corn kernels secreted from the kitchen. We can't stay, she whispered, kneeling beside them on hay smelling of horses and old leather. She pulled her last biscuit from her apron, saved from supper, and broke it equally. Tomorrow we leave for town. Find Dr. Whitcomb, Miss Pike, anyone with backbone to stand against your father. Martha accepted her portion with solemn gravity beyond her years. Papa will come after us. He always does. Then we'll be ready, Nellie replied with more conviction than she felt. They slept fitfully in the hay, waking before dawn to implement their desperate plan. Nellie led the children across prairie toward prairie dawn, following telegraph poles marking the freight road. Morning air carried sage scent and distant rain promise, but underneath lurked something ominous, horses being saddled with unusual haste at the ranch. Kane must have discovered their absence during his routine check. Now Bitter Sam and Massive Mark rode hard from the buildings, shotguns across saddles, and expressions promising violence. "Get down!" Nellie hissed, pushing the children into a shallow buffalo wallow circular depression where great herds once rolled in dust to escape insects. The natural feature provided minimal cover on exposed prairie. "Come out, Mrs. Kane," Bitter Sam's shouted voice carrying across empty grassland. "Boss wants you home for breakfast. No point making this difficult." Massive Mark's laughter sounded like grinding millstones. "He didn't specify what condition to bring you back. Could be we have fun first." A shotgun blast tore through sagebrush inches above their heads, pellets spreading in a deadly pattern that would have killed all three if they'd been standing. Nellie pressed the children deeper, her body shielding them while her father's derringer felt impossibly inadequate. Then salvation arrived as a calm voice cut through morning air like a blade. "Back away. Now." Chaska appeared as if materialized from prairie itself, though he must have been riding treaty lands when gunshots echoed across grassland. His paint mare stood steady as he faced two armed men without apparent concern. "This ain't your business, Indian." Bitter Sam snarled, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Lady's father was friend to my people." Chaska replied with the tone he'd used discussing weather. "Makes it my business." His rifle cracked once bullet striking ground precisely 1 foot in front of Sam's horse. The animal shied and danced backward while the demonstration's message was unmistakably clear. His marksmanship could have found human targets easily. Sam spat a curse that would have impressed cavalry sergeants, but wheeled his mount and retreated with Mark following. "This ain't finished," he called back. "Didn't figure it was." Chaska replied calmly. As immediate danger receded, he dismounted and approached the wallow, carefully movements designed not to startle frightened people. "Safe to come up now," he said, extending his hand. She reached for assistance, but reaction made her fingers shake uncontrollably. Her derringer slipped from her grasp, and she fumbled to reload with hands belonging to someone else. Without comment, Chaska knelt and steadied her hands with his own, guiding her thumb to the hammer with gentle pressure. "Smooth motion," he said quietly. "Don't fight the mechanism." Their skin touched during instruction, practical contact, born of necessity. Yet she felt her pulse steady under his calm guidance. When she looked up, their eyes met and held for heartbeats stretching like hours. In his dark gaze, she glimpsed something unexpected, not just protective duty to her father's memory, but genuine concern for her personally. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank me when you're safe in town." He replied, helping Martha and Victor from hiding. As they began walking toward Prairie Dawn, Nellie realized her situation had fundamentally changed. Kane wouldn't simply accept her disappearance with evidence of his schemes potentially in unfriendly hands. The stakes had escalated beyond a failed marriage into something potentially deadly. But for the first time since arriving in the territory, she wasn't facing danger entirely alone. First obstacle. July 15th. Late morning, Prairie Dawn's main street stretched like a gauntlet of dust, and suspicious eyes deceptively quiet in mounting late-morning heat. Nellie walked with Martha's hand clasped in her left, and Victor clinging to her right arm, while Chaska followed at respectful distance, close enough to intervene, far enough to avoid provoking immediate racial confrontation. Dr. Whitcomb's clinic occupied a narrow building between Henderson's barber shop and Thornton's mercantile rear entrance. The painted sign had faded to illegibility, but the red cross remained clear to those needing medical attention, regardless of payment ability. Nellie nearly reached the clinic steps when Glass-Eyed Joe emerged from covered boardwalk shadows like a spider from its web. His badge gleamed with fresh polish, and his remaining eye fixed on her with predatory intensity. "Mrs. Kane, Falfrey," the sheriff drawled voice, carrying nasal quality of someone who'd learned intimidation worked better than courtesy. "Your husband's worried sick about you and his children." "I need medical attention," Nellie replied, forcing steadiness despite fear that made her knees feel like water. Rope burns had festered in heat, and purple bruises from Kane's violence decorated her throat like obscene jewelry. "What do you need?" Glass-Eyed Joe said, stepping closer with predator movements, "is to go home to your lawful husband like a proper Christian wife." The clinic door opened with a squeal of hinges needing oil, and Dr. Whitcomb emerged with sleeves already rolled up. The former Army surgeon took one professional look at Nellie's condition and stepped protectively between her and the sheriff. "She's injured, Joe," Whitcomb said firmly, voice carrying authority of someone who'd seen too much violence to be impressed by badges and bluster. "That makes her my patient, not your prisoner." "Funny way to look at it, Doc." Glass-Eyed Joe's hand rested casually on his gun belt, fingers drumming leather with practiced menace. "I see a wife who's run off with her husband's children. Makes her a kidnapper, in my professional opinion." Approaching hoofbeats made conversation impossible as Aldrich Kane arrived with 8 hired men. The rancher had changed from work clothes into his finest black suit, the outfit for town council meetings and Sunday services. The costume of respectability, Nellie realized, designed to present himself as the injured party. "Thank God you found her, Sheriff," Kane called, voice pitched to carry to growing onlookers. "Poor Eleanor's been acting strangely since heat affected her yesterday. I feared she might hurt herself or the children." But Prairie Dawn contained more honest citizens than Kane calculated. Miss Lavinia Pike stepped from the schoolhouse, sharp eyes taking in the scene with obvious disapproval. "I can see rope burns from here," she announced clearly, usually quiet voice carrying with surprising authority. "Fresh ones that weren't there yesterday." Fergus O'Rourke emerged from the feed store, battered hat in work-hardened hands, but Irish accent thick with barely controlled indignation. "Aye, and finger marks on her throat plain as daylight. That's no heat sickness." Kane's jaw tightened at these public observations, but he maintained his concerned husband facade with practiced skill. "My wife's been having episodes, Doctor. Perhaps you could examine her and recommend appropriate treatment." "I'll examine her," Whitcomb agreed grimly. "But she stays here while I do it. No discussions." Glass-Eyed Joe shook his head with theatrical regret. "Can't allow that, Doc. She's coming with me to jail for everyone's safety. A lot of concerned citizens want those children returned to their father unharmed." The sheriff's hand moved toward his weapon, but before he could draw, Chaska stepped forward from his observation point. "Woman asked for doctor," he said calmly. "Give her doctor." "You got no legal standing, Indian?" Glass-Eyed Joe's snarled voice rising with frustration at public challenge to his authority. "This is white folks' business." "My business is keeping promises," Chaska replied with weather-discussing tone. "Promised she'd be safe. Mean to keep that promise." Tension stretched taut as violin strings. Martha and Victor pressed closer to Nellie, young faces reflecting terror of children who'd learned adult conflicts turned violent without warning. Several townspeople gathered on boardwalks, drawn by commotion and staying for entertainment. Glass Eye Joe made his decision with swift brutality that had made him effective. He grabbed Nellie's arm, roughly, fingers pressing infected rope burns and causing her to cry out in genuine agony. "You're coming with me, Mrs. Kane," he announced loudly, "for questioning about child endangerment and public disturbance." Dr. Whitcomb stepped forward immediately. "Like blazes she is. Those are infected wounds, and I'm treating them whether you approve or not." "Stand down, doctor." The sheriff warned voice carrying edge of a man prepared to use violence. Instead of backing away, Whitcomb positioned himself directly between sheriff and victim. Chaska shifted as well, hand near his knife without touching it. Miss Lavinia gathered children behind her skirts, while Fergus blocked any retreat toward the ranch. The standoff balanced on violence's edge, pressure building like thunderstorm atmosphere. But Bitter Sam chose that moment to resolve the situation with direct force application. From his horseback position 30 yards away, he raised his double-barreled shotgun and fired deliberately through the clinic's front window. Glass exploded inward in crystalline shower, sending razor fragments cascading across boardwalk like deadly rain. Women screamed and men dove for cover as blast echoes rolled down the street. Several onlookers scattered toward nearby buildings, while others pressed against walls and doorways. "Next one goes into the crowd, unless you folks start cooperating properly." Bitter Sam called remaining barrel, aimed at the cluster defending Nellie. But instead of achieving intended intimidation, violence galvanized defenders into immediate action. Chaska moved like lightning, vaulting onto boardwalk and forcing through the clinic door before Glass Eye Joe could react. Dr. Whitcomb followed immediately, pulling Nellie while Miss Lavinia herded children inside. Fergus grabbed a wooden bench from outside the barbershop and wedged it against the clinic door, creating temporary barricade. "That'll hold a few minutes." He panted, weathered face, flushed with exertion and righteous anger. The clinic's interior was cramped, but efficiently organized with narrow examination table and glass cabinets containing medical supplies gleaming with surgical cleanliness. Dr. Whitcomb immediately began examining Nellie's injuries by lamplight, since shattered window admitted more dust than useful illumination. "Hold still," he muttered, probing rope burns with gentle fingers that had learned precision during 4 years of military surgery. "These are badly infected. Need immediate cleaning and proper bandaging." Outside, more shotgun pellets struck the clinic's outer wall, sending wood splinters flying through the broken window. Chaska positioned himself near the opening, ready to defend against anyone attempting to climb through jagged frame. "This is going to hurt considerably," Whitcomb warned, preparing to clean wounds with carbolic acid that would sterilize infection but burn like liquid fire. He offered Nellie a leather strap to bite, but she found her eyes drawn to Chaska's steady presence near the window. Even in chaos and danger, his calm competence was profoundly reassuring. "Look at me," he said quietly, noticing her focus and understanding what she needed. "Pain is temporary. Focus on what comes after." Their eyes met and held during the worst of the cleaning process, his unwavering gaze somehow making agony more bearable. It was as if his steadiness could transfer directly through visual contact, providing anchor point in a storm of physical suffering. Miss Lavinia held a kerosene lamp steady between her knees, casting golden light dancing with shadows as her hands trembled slightly. Martha and Victor huddled in the corner, but Martha's intelligent eyes missed nothing. "Why is Papa so angry all the time?" she whispered to her brother, her voice carrying exhausted confusion. "Because angry is all he knows how to be," Victor replied with matter-of-fact wisdom of a child forced to mature beyond his years. Outside Glass Eye, Joe's voice rose above general commotion with official authority. "You're harboring a fugitive doctor, That's a federal crime punishable by imprisonment. Show me a proper warrant signed by a real judge. Whitcomb called back without looking up. And we'll discuss cooperation. Until then, she's under medical care. The jailhouse bell began clanging summons, calling every able-bodied man to join the sheriff's expanding posse. Through broken window they could hear boots running on boardwalks and horses being saddled hastily throughout town. How many men can he raise? Nellie asked, weakly voice, made thin by pain and blood loss. Too many. Fergus replied grimly, checking their makeshift barricade. Fear and money make men do things conscience would normally prevent. Chaska examined his ammunition with professional efficiency. Dozen cartridges for his rifle, 6 rounds in his revolver. Against a mob of 30 men, it wouldn't last long. Need to move soon, he said practically, before they surround completely. Dr. Whitcomb finished bandaging Nellie's wrists with strips of clean cotton torn from his own shirt. That's all I can do under these conditions. Keep them clean and dry changed, dressing twice daily. As if summoned by his words, boots on boardwalk announced Kane's expanded posse's arrival. Through gaps in the barricaded door, they could see rifle barrels glinting in harsh afternoon sun. Come out peaceful. Glass-eyed Joe called voice, carrying confidence of overwhelming numerical superiority. And nobody else gets hurt today. Nellie looked around at faces of people who'd risked everything to help her people who barely knew her, but had chosen to stand against injustice regardless of personal cost. She felt something harden in her chest, transforming fear into determination, with sudden crystallinity of water freezing into ice. I'm not going back to him, she said quietly, voice carrying absolute conviction. Chaska nodded approvingly. Then we find another way out. Rising action, July 16th, 17th, 1880. The first chase erupted across prairie dawn like a flash flood through dry arroyo, sudden and overwhelming. Chaska kicked through the clinic's rear door, while Fergus created crucial diversion by hurling Dr. Whitcomb's medical basin through what remained of the front window. Glass-eyed Joe's posse surged toward the crashing sound, giving fugitives precious seconds. Nellie ran between buildings with newly bandaged wrists, throbbing each jarring step. Behind her, Chaska moved with fluid economy of someone who'd learned wasted motion meant death in hostile territory. There, behind Murphy's, someone shouted, "Cut them off at the livery." Another voice answered. They sprinted through the alley behind Murphy's saloon, vaulted a rain barrel collecting precious water from last week's storm, and dove toward Fergus's feed store. One of Kane's hired men lunged from shadows near the tack room, meaty hand, grasping for Nellie's torn sleeve. Before he could secure grip, Chaska struck the man's wrist with his knife handle, not cutting but delivering blow precise enough to send lightning up the attacker's arm and force release with cavalry-worthy curses. "Keep moving," Chaska commanded, pushing toward safety. Fergus had anticipated their desperate need and prepared accordingly. As they approached, he emerged from a side entrance, beckoning urgently. "Quickly now," he whispered, Irish accent thicker with stress. Got a proper hiding place ready. Inside burlap sacks of oats and barley created a maze smelling of grain and honest work. Fergus led them to a corner where several bags concealed a wooden trapdoor root cellar, originally for storing potatoes, but now serving more desperate purpose. They descended into cramped space just as boots thundered overhead like cattle stampede. Dust sifted between floorboards as the posse searched methodically, overturning sacks and prodding corners with rifle barrels. In close confines, Nellie found herself pressed against Chaska's side. The space barely accommodated 4 people, and summer heat made air thick enough to cut. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as panic threatened to overwhelm already strained composure. Chaska noticed immediately. "Match my breathing," he whispered, voice barely audible above search sounds. 4 counts in, 4 out. He placed her hand against her ribs' fingers, guiding hers to feel controlled respiration rhythm. "Feel that in. 2, 3, 4. Out. 2, 3, 4. Gradually, panic receded as she synchronized with his steady pattern. In dusty, filtered light, seeping through floorboard gaps, their eyes met and held. Immediate danger, discomfort, even pursuit sounds faded into background noise. Their forced proximity had created intimacy beyond mere physical contact. His protective positioning, the way he'd instinctively shielded her and the children from discovery, spoke to impulses running deeper than duty to her father's memory. "Better?" he asked softly. She nodded, suddenly aware how their circumstances had pushed them past conventional social boundaries into something more meaningful and complex. Above them, Glass-Eyed Joe's voice carried clearly. "They were here recently, but they've moved on. Check every building on both sides of the street." They remained motionless until search sounds moved away, then climbed carefully back to ground level where Fergus waited with supplies he'd gathered during their hiding. 2 horses from Henderson's stable," he explained quietly, "plus water and provisions for several days. Also got word to Miss Pike she's hidden the children safe in the school's coal closet." But relief was short-lived. As they prepared to leave, splintering wood echoed from the schoolhouse direction. Through the window, they could see Deputy Morrison kicking at the school door, his badge glinting as he applied official authority to unauthorized entry. "That door won't hold long," Chaska observed grimly. Inside the schoolhouse, Miss Lavinia Pike braced against the coal closet door as pressure from sliding fuel threatened to crush the children hiding behind it. Morrison's violent entry had destabilized carefully stacked coal, creating an avalanche that could easily kill 2 small bodies. "Hold tight, children." Lavinia grunted, shoulder pressed against heavy wooden door, while her feet sought purchase on smooth floor. "Martha, can you reach that broom handle?" The 10-year-old stretched desperately through narrow gap between door and frame, thin arm extending until fingertips barely grasped worn bristles. Fighting against shifting coal weight, she managed to wedge the handle against the door frame, creating makeshift brace that took pressure off Lavinia's aching shoulder. Victor pressed into the closet corner, tears streaming silently down coal-dusted face as black chunks shifted ominously above his head. The space was dark, cramped, and increasingly dangerous, but his sister's whispered reassurances kept him from crying out and revealing their location. Outside the closet, Morrison searched methodically through the schoolroom, overturning desks and examining every potential hiding place. With thoroughness of a man who understood failure meant explaining himself to both Glass-Eyed Joe and Aldrich Kane. His bootsteps approached the coal closet several times, paused as if considering, then moved away, apparently convinced the door was simply stuck rather than deliberately barricaded. Meanwhile, Dr. Whitcomb had undertaken his own dangerous mission, based on growing suspicions about Kane's financial situation. His medical practice had brought him into contact with most of Prairie Dawn's leading citizens, and he'd noticed disturbing patterns, unpaid bills, hushed conversations about overdue loans, Kane's increasing desperation to control every aspect of local economy. The Cattlemen's Bank occupied substantial brick building on Main Street, its construction and iron-barred windows proclaiming financial stability that might not reflect reality. Victor Pine's second-floor office was accessible through outside staircase that creaked ominously under Whitcomb's weight, each step seeming loud as gunshots in afternoon quiet. Through Pine's window, the doctor could see ledger books spread across mahogany desk, like evidence of financial catastrophe. Kane's debt records lay partially visible, showing months of missed payments and mounting interest painting impending bankruptcy. Whitcomb's hands shook as he copied damning figures onto prescription pad scraps. His medical training and precise documentation served him well as he recorded dates, amounts, and payment schedules, revealing Kane's desperation scope. Pencil scratching seemed thunderously loud in quiet office, each stroke potentially announcing his presence to anyone within hearing. Every number recorded painted clearer picture of financial ruin: $4,000 in loans, 8 months behind on payments with Mud Creek water rights, pledged as only collateral valuable enough to satisfy creditors. A board creaked in the hallway, followed by boots on wooden stairs. Whitcomb's head snapped up from the ledger, heart hammering against ribs like trapped bird. Pine's voice carried through thin walls, speaking to someone ascending the staircase. Matters should be resolved within hours. Kane assures me his wife won't cause further difficulties once she's back under proper supervision. The doctor quickly folded copied notes and slipped them into his vest pocket movements, made clumsy by fear and absolute silence need. As he turned toward the window, his elbow knocked against ornate ink bottle, sending it rolling across the desk with thunder sound. The bottle struck floor and shattered, spilling black ink across office boards, an expanding pool impossible to explain or conceal. Hallway conversation stopped abruptly, replaced by footsteps, moving rapidly toward the office door. Whitcomb dove through window onto outside landing just as the office door burst open behind him. Pine's furious shout echoed across town square. "Stop that man, thief!" A pistol shot cracked behind the fleeing doctor, bullet splintering wood inches from his left ear as he tumbled downstairs in controlled fall that probably saved his life. His medical bag bounced ahead, instruments scattering across dusty ground as he rolled into alley behind the bank. A second shot kicked up dirt near his boots as he scrambled toward nearby building cover. But by then, other citizens were emerging to investigate gunfire, and Pine apparently decided public murder was inadvisable, even with his connections. By late afternoon, scattered fugitives had managed to reunite at Mud Creek Crossing, where stream ran full and clear from recent mountain snowmelt. Under normal circumstances, the setting would have been peaceful cottonwoods, providing shade, birds calling from reeds, flowing water creating natural music, soothing the soul. Instead, it had become site of their second desperate flight from increasingly violent pursuit. Glass-eyed Joe had deployed his expanded posse with military precision positioning men at strategic points to control all major escape routes. The sheriff himself occupied rocky outcrop above the creek, his Winchester commanding clear field of fire across water that made crossing under direct observation virtually suicidal. "Come down peaceful," he called, voice carrying clearly in still air. "Save everyone trouble and some folks a lot of pain." Chaska and Nellie exchanged glances, communicating volumes without words. Both understood the sheriff's safe passage offer was worthless. Kane had invested too much in his scheme to allow living witnesses who could testify about forged documents and coerced marriages. They mounted borrowed horses and spurred toward creek at full gallop, hooves throwing earth clods as they raced toward water. Glass-eyed Joe's rifle cracked, bullet striking boulder in streambed and sending stone fragments flying like shrapnel. One razor-sharp shard opened, cut along Chaska's left cheekbone, sending blood streaming down his face in crimson trail, looking far worse than it actually was. Without hesitation or conscious thought, Nellie tore strip from her dress hem and pressed it against his wound while they rode side by side through splashing water. The practical gesture required her to lean close, their horses moving in synchronized rhythm through current. For a moment seeming to last forever, their faces were inches apart, her fingers gentle against his skin, despite their situation's urgency. "You're bleeding," she said, stating obvious, because words seemed necessary in intimate space they'd created. "I'm alive," he replied, voice rough with something deeper than physical pain. As creek deepened toward center, both horses began struggling against current that seemed manageable from bank, but proved treacherous in practice. Chaska's mount stumbled on slippery streambed rocks, threatening to throw both riders into water deep enough to drown them if they lost consciousness. Without thinking, he reached out and lifted Nellie across to his saddle arms, encircling her as they fought to maintain balance against the creek's surprising power. The maneuver left them pressed together in ways that would have been scandalous under normal circumstances, but felt completely natural given immediate danger. "Hold on," he commanded, voice close to her ear. She wrapped arms around his neck, feeling solid strength of his shoulders and warmth of his skin through fabric dampened by creek water and perspiration. "Are you steady?" She asked the question, carrying implications neither was ready to examine closely. "Getting there," he replied, tone softer than circumstances seemed to warrant. They reached far bank just as Kane's main force arrived at crossing. Deeper water would slow pursuit temporarily, but everyone understood delay was measured in minutes rather than hours. Kane's men knew territory intimately and would find alternate routes across creek within short time. "Wild Horse Canyon," Chaska said, pointing toward narrow cleft in rocky hills rising beyond grassland. "Defensive position, but only one way out if they get behind us." As they rode toward canyon mouth, Nellie realized their situation had evolved beyond simple escape from unwanted marriage. This had become battle for survival against men who would stop at nothing to prevent her testimony from reaching legitimate authorities. But beside her, Chaska rode with calm determination, despite blood drying on his cheek like primitive war paint. For the first time since arriving in territory, she felt like she had true partner in whatever fight lay ahead. Midpoint Twist, July 17th evening. Wild Horse Canyon earned its name from red sandstone walls rising like ancient fortress battlements on either side of passage, barely wide enough for two riders. At canyon heart lay hidden alcove, where natural springs seeped from bedrock, creating small oases that had sheltered travelers, outlaws, and fugitives for generations beyond memory. Dr. Whitcomb and Fergus waited in alcove with supplies and news that would change everything. Beside them sat trusty Tom, and the county clerk, his nervous hands clutching leather document pouch, while his eyes darted constantly toward canyon entrance like rabbits sensing wolves. Tom here finally found his backbone, Whitcomb explained as they dismounted, voice carrying grim satisfaction. "Seems his conscience got better of his bank account." Tom's voice shook as words tumbled out in rush of confession and fear. "They paid me to falsify filings, but I kept copies of everything for insurance purposes. When I heard about violence, about them shooting at women and children, I couldn't." He opened document pouch with trembling fingers. "I brought everything real, contracts, forged deeds, all of it." Nellie accepted papers with hands remaining steady despite magnitude of what she was about to discover. Her father's original deed to Mud Creek lay on top, but it bore alterations, making her blood run cold. Where document should have read, "Eleanor Hart, sole heir and owner," someone had inserted additional language in ink, not quite matching the original "Eleanor Hart, heir, with trustee powers granted to Miss Lavinia Pike, distant cousin, and appointed guardian until said heir reaches legal majority at 21 years. "Lavinia?" Nellie whispered, voice barely audible above trickling water sound. But she never mentioned being named trustee. "Look at signature line." Whitcomb urged, his own anger evident in jaw muscles working beneath skin. Trustee's signature space remained blank. Lavinia Pike had never signed the document, meaning trusteeship had never been legally activated. More damning still, inserted language appeared written in same distinctive handwriting as Kane's banking contracts, with identical ink color and pen pressure suggesting simultaneous composition. Kane forged the trustee clause. Tom continued, guilt pouring out like water from broken dam. paid me $50 to file it, as if Miss Pike had signed, but I kept original because I knew something wasn't right. Then, when marriage happened so quickly, I realized what they were really planning. Chaska studied documents with careful attention of someone who'd learned to read English legal language out of pure necessity. His dark eyes moved methodically across each line, absorbing implications and connections with same focused intensity he'd apply to tracking dangerous game. Marriage gives him temporary control, he said slowly, but if there's trustee who never agreed to serve, marriage becomes legally meaningless as property transfer. Whitcomb finished. Kane has no legitimate claim to Mud Creek under territorial law. But most shocking revelation emerged from final document in Tom's pouch certified copy of letter from William Hart to Territorial Land Office filed 7 months before his death, and bearing official stamps proving its authenticity beyond reasonable doubt. Nellie's hands trembled as she read her father's precise handwriting. Territorial Land Commissioner. In consideration of services rendered during February 1876 winter storm, when Chaska of the Lakota band discovered me unconscious and near death from exposure on open prairie, carried me 15 miles to safety at considerable risk to his own life, and subsequently recovered my stolen mare from horse thieves at personal danger, I hereby appoint said Chaska as legal steward of Mud Creek water rights in the event of my death and my daughter Eleanor's minority status. This appointment recognizes not only the life debt I owe this man, but also his demonstrated understanding of proper land stewardship and his people's proven record as responsible guardians of natural resources. The stewardship shall remain in effect until my daughter reaches her 21st birthday and can assume full legal responsibility for the property. Witnessed and sealed this day with full legal authority. William Hart, sole owner, Mud Creek water rights. The letter included specific details that could only have come from someone who'd experienced described events, dates, weather conditions, even distinctive markings on Hart's recovered mare. It painted vivid picture of life-saving rescue Chaska had never mentioned carried out during one of Territory's most savage winter storms. You were there, Nellie said, looking up at Chaska with dawning understanding and something deeper than mere gratitude. You saved his life. Chaska shifted uncomfortably clearly, disliking attention focused on past actions. Man was dying in snow. Horse needed finding, nothing special about helping. Nothing special. Nellie's voice rose with incredulous emotion she didn't try to control. You risked your own life to save a stranger, and he never forgot it. That's why you felt obligated to help me, not just because of trading relationships, but because you were already legally responsible for protecting what he left behind. Because your father trusted him enough to make him guardian. Dr. Whitcomb added softly, medical training allowing him to recognize shock when he saw it. Trusted him with family's most valuable asset. Implications crashed over Nellie like physical blow, leaving her momentarily breathless. Her marriage to Kane hadn't just been based on forged documents and coercion, it had been completely unnecessary from legal standpoint. Her father had already arranged for Mud Creek's protection through someone he trusted, absolutely someone whose honor and competence had been proven through life-threatening action. He married me for nothing. She whispered words, carrying mixture of relief and fury, making her voice shake. He married you for water and profit. Chaska corrected grimly. Same things men have killed for since first drought. But even as legal revelation shifted balance of power dramatically in their favor, their immediate physical situation remained desperately dangerous. Tom's confession had been motivated by genuine remorse, but also by growing fear as Kane's operation became increasingly violent and indiscriminate. They're planning something for tonight, Clerk warned, voice dropping to whisper, as if Kane's men might overhear even in Canyon's remote sanctuary. Heard Glass-Eyed Joe talking about making examples about showing whole territory what happens to folks who interfere with legitimate business. Approaching horses' sound echoed off canyon walls, amplified and distorted by stone acoustics, until it was impossible to judge exact number of riders or their precise location. Glass-Eyed Joe's voice carried clearly through gathering dusk. Only one way in, only one way out. We control the mouth they'll have to surrender eventually or starve. In Alcove's closed confines, Nellie found herself studying Chaska with entirely new eyes. This man had saved her father's life years before she was born, had been entrusted with her family's legacy through formal legal document, and had risked everything to honor that trust without ever mentioning true depth of his obligation. Connection between them ran far deeper than she'd realized, not just chance encounter at community well, but roots stretching back through years of unspoken honor and carefully maintained responsibility. "Why didn't you tell me about the letter?" she asked quietly, voice barely audible above trickling water sound. "Your father asked me not to," Chaska replied simply. Said a man shouldn't expect gratitude for doing what's right. As he rewrapped her bandages with practiced efficiency, his hands moved with gentle precision of someone accustomed to caring for injured creatures. When he looked up to check her comfort level, their eyes met and held for heartbeats seeming to stretch into infinity. "I should have known," she said softly, voice carrying implications neither was quite ready to voice aloud. "You know now," he replied, tone suggesting present knowledge mattered more than past ignorance. Moments stretched between them heavy with unspoken possibilities and acknowledged connection going far beyond legal documents or family obligations. But before either could find words for feelings still crystallizing into recognizable form, Tom's nervous whisper interrupted their communion. "What do we do now? They've got us trapped like rats in barrel." Dr. Whitcomb checked his pistol with methodical movements of a man who'd seen too much frontier violence to panic, but whose medical oath still made him reluctant to use lethal force except in absolute extremity. "We make them work for whatever they get from us." But Chaska was studying canyon walls with calculating gaze of someone who'd learned to see escape routes where others saw only obstacles. Red sandstone rose nearly vertical for first 20 feet, but ancient erosion had carved subtle handholds and ledges that might be negotiable by someone with right combination of skill, courage, and desperation. "There's another way," he said slowly, voice carrying measured tone of a man working through possibilities. "Harder way? Dangerous way that could get us all killed." He pointed to narrow ledge winding up canyon's eastern wall, barely visible in growing shadows cast by setting sun. "Old hunting trail. Goes over rim down into Goldwater Valley." Goldwater. Nellie breathed, heart suddenly beating faster with something that might have been hope. That was where Circuit Judge Harrison would be holding court according to his published monthly schedule, if they could reach him with their evidence. 20 feet of exposed climbing, Fergus' worn, weathered face reflecting genuine concern. One slip means fall onto rocks that'll kill you just as dead as bullet. Better odds than staying here to be picked off like ducks in pond, Whitcomb replied grimly. As they prepared for what might be their final desperate gamble, Nellie realized everything had changed in ways going far beyond legal documents and property rights. She wasn't just running from unwanted marriage anymore. She was fighting to reclaim rightful inheritance alongside man her father had chosen to protect it. Man whose quiet honor and proven courage had earned trust transcending racial boundaries and social conventions. Twist wasn't just legal, it was profoundly personal. Connection she'd felt with Chaska from their first meeting hadn't been coincidence or simple physical attraction. It was fulfillment of trust established years before they'd ever met, bond forged in her father's gratitude and Chaska's unwavering integrity. "Ready," Chaska asked, extending his hand to help her toward ledge representing either salvation or destruction. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied, taking his hand and feeling calloused strength that had once carried her father to safety through killing blizzard. Second obstacle, July 17th night. The ledge proved even more treacherous than it appeared from below, barely 18 inches wide, and crumbling where winter freeze and summer heat had fractured ancient sandstone. 20 feet below canyon floor was littered with sharp rocks and bleached bones of animals that had misjudged similar climbs. Chaska went first, testing each handhold with methodical care before committing full weight. Behind him, Nellie pressed against rock face with desperate intensity, trying not to look down at death, waiting for anyone who lost grip. Dr. Whitcomb followed, medical bag strapped tightly across his back, while Fergus brought up rear with Tom, whose whimpers of terror threatened to give away their position. They'd made it halfway up canyon wall when first rifle shot echoed from mouth. Glass-eyed Joe had spotted their escape attempt through gathering darkness. There, on east wall, don't let them reach rim. Bullets began striking rocks around them with sharp cracks, sending stone chips flying like angry hornets. One fragment opened, cut above Nellie's left eye, sending blood streaming down her face and partially blinding her at worst possible moment. "Keep moving," Chaska called back, voice steady despite bullets whining past his head with lethal intent. "Don't look down, don't stop, don't think about anything except next handhold." But their progress was agonizingly slow on narrow ledge, and shooters below had time to improve aim with each passing second. Bullets struck rock inches from Tom's right hand, and terrified clerk lost grip entirely, his body swinging out over empty space with scream echoing off canyon walls. Fergus lunged forward without hesitation, grabbing Tom's wrist with both hands as younger man dangled over certain death. Effort left both men exposed and motionless, perfect targets for riflemen below, already adjusting aim for easier shots. "Hold on, lad." Fergus grunted, own position precarious as he fought to pull Tom back onto ledge. "Don't you dare let go." Glass-eyed Joe took careful aim with his Winchester single eye, squinting down barrel as he prepared to end rescue attempt with well-placed bullet. Shot rang out across canyon, and Fergus jerked as slug took him through right, lung blood frothing immediately at his lips. But wounded Irishman's grip never wavered. With last reserves of strength, he hauled Tom to safety before slumping against canyon wall, breath coming in shallow gasps everyone recognized as death's approach. Keep going." He managed thick accent made almost incomprehensible by pain and approaching unconsciousness. Don't let this be for nothing." "Derasward." Whitcomb immediately dropped to examine wound professional training, overriding danger of their exposed position. One look told him everything he needed to know. Bullet had punctured lung and likely nicked major blood vessels. Without immediate surgery and proper medical facility, Fergus would be dead within minutes. "I can't move him," Whitcomb said grimly, voice carrying finality of medical judgment. "Not in this condition, not on this ledge." But staying meant death for all of them as more of Kane's men arrived at canyon mouth, their voices organizing systematic assault on remaining climbers. Soon they'd have enough rifles positioned to make ledge completely untenable. "Leave me." Fergus whispered, eyes already growing glassy with blood loss and approaching death. "Get the girl, get the evidence, to safety." Instead of abandoning wounded man, Chaska made decision revealing full measure of his character. He gathered Fergus in his arms, preparing to carry him, despite obvious impossibility of continuing climb while burdened with dying man's weight. "You'll never make it," Whitcomb protested, voice thick with emotion and professional frustration. He's too heavy, you need both hands for climbing, and every second we delay makes discovery more likely. Then I make it with one hand, Chaska replied with simple finality. He slung Fergus across his shoulders and firemen's carry wounded man's blood soaking through his shirt. With Nellie calling out handholds and foot placements from her position slightly above them, they somehow maintained precarious progress up increasingly vertical rock face. Physical strain was enormous. Chaska's arms trembled with effort as he pulled their combined weight up rock face, while Fergus's labored breathing grew steadily weaker with each passing minute. Twice loose rock gave way beneath them, sending small avalanches cascading down onto frustrated shooters below. They reached canyon rim just as Fergus drew his final breath, body going limp with sudden finality, marking transition from life to death. Chaska lowered body gently onto solid ground, own chest, heaving with exhaustion and emotional strain. He was good man, Nellie said softly, kneeling beside still form. Good men die too often in places like this. Whitcomb replied, checking uselessly for pulse he knew wouldn't be there. They took precious minutes to bury Fergus properly among canyon rim's scattered boulders, piling stones over his body, and placing battered hat on top as marker. It was small gesture in vast wilderness, but it mattered in frontier territories. Proper burial was often only dignity dead could expect. As they worked, Tom kept nervous watch over canyon edge. "They're climbing up after us," he reported, voice tight with fear. Glass-eyed Joe's got rope and they're making good time. Pursuit resumed immediately, but now they had clear destination visible in distance. Goldwater nestled in valley below, scattered buildings barely visible in moonlight, but courthouse chimney smoking with evidence that Circuit Judge Harrison was indeed holding court as scheduled. They half ran, half slid down rocky slope toward Town Tom, clutching document pouch with desperate intensity, while others provided what protection they could. Behind them, pursuit grew louder as Kane's men reached canyon rim and spread out in hunting formation designed to prevent any escape toward civilization. But Goldwater offered dangers of its own that became apparent as they approached town's outskirts. Chaska's sharp eyes spotted movement among buildings ahead, horses tied in shadows, glint of rifle barrels in upper-story windows, men positioned with tactical precision of military ambush. "They're here ahead of us," he said quietly, voice carrying grim recognition of their tactical situation. Kane sent riders long way around. Trap was expertly constructed. Courthouse sat in middle of Goldwater's main street, accessible only through narrow corridor, flanked by buildings perfect for concealing armed men. Anyone attempting to reach Judge Harrison would have to cross 200 yards of open ground under direct observation from multiple firing positions. "How many?" Whitcomb asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected answer wouldn't be encouraging. "Maybe 30 rifles," Chaska replied after careful count of visible positions. "Plus, however many are coming up behind us from canyon." They were caught between two superior forces, with nowhere to run and no hope of fighting through organized opposition. Judge who could legitimize their evidence and restore Nellie's legal rights was less than 300 yards away. But those yards might as well have been 300 miles, given firepower arrayed against them. Nellie stared at courthouse, where salvation waited so tantalizingly close, its territorial flag hanging limp in still night air. After everything they'd endured, everyone they'd lost, it seemed impossible they would fail within sight of their goal. But as she watched Chaska methodically check his remaining ammunition, 4 bullets in revolver, none in rifle, she realized something fundamental had shifted in her priorities. Somewhere during their shared ordeal, her motivation had evolved from simple escape to something more complex and infinitely more precious. She was no longer just fighting to reclaim inheritance or escape unwanted marriage. She was fighting to protect man who'd risked everything to honor her father's trust, Man who'd proven his character through actions rather than words. Man she'd come to trust with her life, and something even more valuable. "You could circle around," she suggested, quietly, voice barely audible above night sounds of insects and distant pursuit. "Take evidence to judge yourself. Come back with federal marshals." Chaska's response was immediate and uncompromising. "No." "But it would be safer." "No," he repeated, meeting her eyes with intensity, making her breath catch. "We started this together. We finish it together, whatever the cost." In that moment, Nellie understood that whatever happened in battle ahead, she was no longer facing danger alone. Knowledge brought not comfort, but deeper terror. She had found something precious in this violent frontier, something worth protecting even at cost of her own survival. Sound of approaching horses grew louder from both directions as Kane's forces closed their trap. In minutes, they would be caught in crossfire, with no possibility of escape and no hope of reaching authorities who could restore justice. "Well," Dr. Whitcomb said, checking his pistol with hands that no longer trembled, "if we're going to die, at least we'll die for something that matters more than money." Chaska positioned himself to shield Nellie from worst of anticipated gunfire movements, carrying calm precision of someone who'd accepted death as possibility, but refused to surrender without extracting price from enemies. "When shooting starts," he said calmly, "you run for that courthouse. Don't stop, don't look back, don't think about anything except reaching judge." "What about you?" "I'll buy you time you need." Simple statement carried implications, making her throat constrict with emotion she didn't dare examine too closely. This man was prepared to sacrifice his life to give her chance at justice, and they both understood his chances of survival were virtually non-existent. But then something unexpected happened. A new sound cut through night air, distant thunder of many horses approaching at speed, but from wrong direction to be Kane's reinforcements. Through darkness, torches became visible, moving toward Goldwater in organized formation that spoke of official authority rather than hired violence. Hope flickered in Nellie's chest like candle flame in wind, fragile but persistent, despite overwhelming odds against them. Climax, July 18th, dawn to noon. Dawn broke with deceptive tranquility over Goldwater, painting eastern sky in shades of rose and gold that belied violence brewing in town streets. The trap Kane had so carefully constructed was revealed in cruel detail. As morning light illuminated rifle barrels glinting from every window and rooftop commanding approaches to the courthouse, 43 armed men had positioned themselves with military precision, creating overlapping fields of fire that would make any approach to legitimate authority virtually suicidal. But salvation arrived in form. And they hadn't expected. The thundering hoofbeats belonged not to more of Kane's reinforcements, but to Federal Marshal William Stevens and a detachment of U.S. Cavalry detachment summoned by Judge Harrison's emergency telegraph that reached the nearest army post at Fort Laramie. Goldwater lay roughly 50 miles from Fort Laramie along the Platte Road, close enough for a hard night ride once the wire went out. "This is Deputy Marshal Stevens with federal warrant," came the authoritative voice carried on morning breeze. All parties lay down arms immediately, by order of territorial government. Kane's carefully orchestrated trap suddenly became a prison for his own forces. But the rancher wasn't finished yet. Desperation made men dangerous, and he'd invested too much in his scheme to surrender without extracting maximum cost from his enemies. From his position behind Peterson's general store, Kane himself stepped into view, wearing his finest black suit, as if attending funeral, which Nellie realized with growing dread might be exactly his intention. His pale gray eyes swept the street until they found her crouched behind overturned freight wagon. "Eleanor." His voice cracked across morning air like whip snap. "This is your husband speaking. You've caused enough trouble with your hysterics. Come here now and we'll discuss your condition." privately. But before she could respond, movement in courthouse caught her attention. Judge Harrison appeared at shattered front window, his silver hair unmistakable even at distance. He was alive, which meant their evidence remained intact, and legal validation was still possible. Then she noticed something that chilled her blood, smoke beginning to curl from courthouse's upper windows. Someone had set fire to the building, threatening to destroy not just their evidence, but the one man who could legitimize their claims. "The courthouse," she called to Chaska. "They're burning it." Chaska's jaw tightened as he understood the implications. Without Judge Harrison and their documented evidence, they remained fugitives with no legal standing. Kane was eliminating the only authority who could restore justice to their situation. "Marshal Stevens," Dr. Whitcomb shouted toward the federal forces. "The courthouse is on fire. Judge Harrison's trapped inside, but the marshal's men were pinned down by crossfire from Kane's positioned rifles, unable to advance through deadly corridor of Main Street without taking catastrophic casualties. Time was measured in minutes before smoke and flames would make rescue impossible." "I'm going," Chaska said, checking his ammunition one final time. "That's suicide," Whitcomb protested. 40 rifles between here and there. "Then we create distraction," Nellie said, surprising herself with calm determination in her voice. She'd been watching learning growing throughout their ordeal. No longer the frightened Eastern girl who'd stepped off the stage, she was ready to take active role in their survival. Her father's Derringer held 2 shots, not much against overwhelming odds, but enough to contribute meaningfully if used at right moment. "I'll draw fire from the left side," she continued. "You and Dr. Whitcomb create commotion from the right. Give Chaska clear path to the courthouse." "Absolutely not," Chaska said immediately. "Too dangerous." "Everything's too dangerous now," she replied, meeting his eyes with resolve that matched his own. "But together, we might just succeed, where any of us alone would fail." For heartbeat that stretched into eternity, their gazes held across space that seemed simultaneously vast and intimate. In his dark eyes, she saw reflection of her own transformation. Fear tempered into courage, uncertainty forged into determination, isolation transformed into unbreakable partnership. "Together, then," he said, voice carrying weight of absolute commitment. The assault began with coordinated precision, born of shared trust and desperate necessity. Dr. Whitcomb emerged from cover behind Miller's Bakery, his pistol cracking as he deliberately drew attention of Kane's riflemen positioned on that side of street. Simultaneously, Nellie broke from her concealment behind the freight wagon, running zigzag pattern that made her difficult target, while her Derringer barked its defiance at the surrounding forces. "There's the girl," someone shouted. "Don't let her reach the courthouse." Rifle fire erupted from multiple positions as Kane's men focused on what they perceived as the primary threat. Bullets kicked up dust around Nellie's feet and splintered wood from buildings as she dodged between obstacles, but their attention was divided between multiple targets. In the chaos, Chaska moved like shadow-given substance, his knife finding throats and his few remaining bullets, dropping men who stood between him and burning courthouse. He reached the building's front steps just as flames began consuming second-floor smoke pouring from windows in choking clouds. But inside the courthouse, Judge Harrison was still alive and conscious, though barely. The elderly jurist had taken refuge in his ground-floor chambers when the fire started using wet blankets to create breathable space, while flames consumed building above him. "Your Honor," Chaska called through smoke. "Where are the documents?" "Safe," Harrison croaked back. "Fireproof vault." But building won't last much longer. Through shattered courthouse windows, They could see Tom's precious evidence secured in the judge's iron strongbox, protected from flames, but inaccessible if the building collapsed. They had minutes at most before the structure became completely untenable. Outside, the battle had intensified beyond anything anyone had anticipated. Marshal Stevens and his men were advancing methodically up Main Street, but Kane's forces were fighting with desperation of men who knew capture meant federal prison. Bodies littered the dusty thoroughfare, and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with smoke from the burning courthouse. Nellie found herself pinned behind water trough as bullets chewed chunks from its wooden sides. Her derringer was empty, but she'd discovered something during the fight, courage under fire, that surprised even her. Instead of cowering, she was calculating angles and distances, looking for opportunities to contribute rather than simply survive. Massive Mark appeared around corner of building she was using for cover, his bulk blocking escape route, while his double-bitted axe gleamed wickedly in morning sun. The giant's pig-like eyes held promise of violence that went beyond simple killing he intended to make her suffer for the trouble she'd caused. "End of line, Eastern girl," he growled, raising axe for killing blow. But Nellie had learned more than courage during their ordeal. She'd learned to be practical about survival. Instead of trying to outfight someone twice her size, she grabbed a handful of sand and threw it directly into Mark's eyes, then rolled under his blind swing and came up behind him with sharp rock in her hand. The stone connected with base of his skull, and massive Mark toppled forward like felled tree, his axe spinning away across dusty ground. Nellie stared at his motionless form with mixture of satisfaction and revulsion. She'd killed a man, but it had been necessary for survival. "Good job," came Dr. Whitcomb's voice behind her. The doctor had worked his way around buildings to provide support, his own pistol smoking from recent use. "You're becoming quite the frontier woman." But their victory was short-lived. Glass-Eye Joe appeared from behind overturned wagon, his Winchester trained on Nellie with deadly precision. The sheriff's single eye burned with fanatical determination. He would complete his mission, even if it meant dying in the attempt. "Should have stayed back east where you belonged," he snarled, finger tightening on trigger. The rifle cracked, but instead of Nellie falling, it was Glass-Eye Joe who pitched forward into dust. Behind him stood Martha Kane, holding her father's smoking pistol with both small hands, tears streaming down her dirt-stained face. "He was going to hurt you," the 10-year-old said simply. "Papa hurts everyone, but you tried to save us." Before anyone could respond to this shocking development, new crisis demanded attention. The courthouse roof was beginning to collapse, sending showers of sparks and burning debris into street. If Chaska and Judge Harrison were still inside, they had seconds rather than minutes before the building became their tomb. "The back door," Nellie shouted, remembering building's layout from their earlier visit. "There's still a way out." She ran toward rear of courthouse, dodging falling embers and breathing smoke that seared her lungs. Behind her, Dr. Whitcomb followed with Martha clinging to his hand. The child had nowhere else to go, with her father's forces collapsing around them. At courthouse's rear entrance, they found Chaska emerging with Judge Harrison slung over his shoulder and the precious strongbox tucked under his other arm. Both men were blackened with smoke and singed from falling debris, but they were alive, and the evidence was preserved. "Documents?" Nellie asked breathlessly. "Safe," Harrison croaked, accepting water from Dr. Whitcomb's canteen. "Everything we need to hang Kane and his associates." But Kane himself had one final card to play. As federal marshals mopped up his scattered forces and arrested surviving members of his conspiracy, the rancher appeared from concealment with rifle trained on the group clustered behind burning courthouse. "Nobody moves," he commanded, voice carrying edge of madness that made everyone freeze. "I've lost everything because of this Eastern witch, but I'll be damned if she lives to enjoy it." His finger was tightening on trigger when unexpected salvation arrived from quarter none of them had anticipated. Victor Kane, the 7-year-old boy who'd been hiding in schoolhouse throughout the battle, stepped from behind, building with his father's backup pistol held in both small hands. "Papa," the child said, voice steady, despite tears streaming down his face. "Please don't hurt anyone else. Please just stop." Kane whirled toward his stun rifle, swinging away from Nellie toward the boy who dared to oppose him. "You little—" The words were his last. Chaska's knife took him in the back, sliding between ribs to find his heart with precision, born of desperate necessity. Aldrich Kane pitched forward into dust that was already stained with blood of too many good people, his schemes dying with him. In sudden silence that followed, only sound was crackling flames, consuming courthouse and distant cries of wounded men scattered throughout Goldwater's streets. The battle was over, but victory had come at terrible cost. Judge Harrison struggled to his feet, supported by Dr. Whitcomb's steady arm. "The evidence," he said, voice stronger now that immediate danger had passed. "Everything we need to legitimize Miss Hart's claims and expose the full extent of this conspiracy." As federal marshals secured the scene and began treating wounded, Nellie found herself standing beside Mud Creek, where their ordeal had begun. The water flowed clear and steady, unmarked by violence that had raged around it, carrying promise of life to everyone who understood its value. Chaska appeared beside her, his own wounds superficial, but his face bearing weight of everything they'd endured together. "It's over," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, but both understood that ending of one chapter meant beginning of another. They'd fought for justice and won, but more importantly, they discovered something worth fighting for in the first place. Standing together beside waters that had brought them together, they faced future that would require all their combined strength to build properly. But for first time since arriving in territory, Nellie felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She was no longer alone, and that made all difference in world. Falling action, July 18th afternoon. The aftermath settled over Goldwater like dust after windstorm, leaving visible evidence of violence in shattered windows, bullet-scarred walls, and the acrid smell of gunpowder that would linger for days. Federal Marshal Stevens supervised arrests with methodical efficiency of a man who'd spent 20 years bringing order to lawless territories. Kane's surviving associates were loaded into prison wagons with chains that rang like funeral bells, while the dead were laid out respectfully pending burial arrangements. The cost had been high. 7 of Kane's men killed 3 federal marshals wounded, and property damage that would take months to repair. Judge Harrison, despite smoke inhalation and minor burns, insisted on conducting immediate legal proceedings to legitimize the evidence they'd fought so hard to preserve. The courthouse was destroyed, but justice wouldn't wait for new buildings. "Legal status is clear," he announced from makeshift bench constructed of freight crates in front of Peterson's store. Original deed to Mud Creek water rights properly witnessed and filed. Stewardship agreement appointing Chaska as legal guardian also properly executed. Fraudulent marriage contract rendered null and void by evidence of coercion and forgery. Victor Pine, the corrupt banker, had been found hiding in his office vault surrounded by ledgers, documenting years of illegal schemes extending far beyond Kane's water rights theft. His arrest would trigger investigations reaching into territorial government itself. Miss Lavinia Pike arrived from Prairie Dawn with Dr. Whitcomb's medical supplies and clean clothes for the children who'd been caught in the violence. Martha and Victor Kane clung to her protective presence, their faces bearing trauma that would require time and care to heal. "What will happen to them?" Nellie asked, watching the children with heart that ached for their suffering. "Kane's sister in Denver has agreed to take them," Lavinia replied. Margaret never approved of Aldrich's methods. She'll provide proper home and education they deserve. The school teacher knelt beside Martha, whose brave actions with her father's pistol had saved Nellie's life. "You did right thing, child," she said gently. Stopping violence took more courage than causing it. Martha nodded solemnly, then looked up at Nellie with eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. "Will you write to us? Tell us how the water business works out." Every month, Nellie promised, meaning it, absolutely. "You'll always be part of this story, both of you." Tom, the county clerk, had found unexpected authority during crisis and now spoke with confidence impossible during Kane's intimidation. "I'll need proper signatures on the partnership documents," he explained, organizing papers with professional competence. "Miss Pike as trustee, Miss Hart as inheritor, and Chaska as appointed steward." The legal formalities were completed within an hour, establishing framework for managing Mud Creek that balanced competing interests through cooperation rather than corruption. Representatives from mining operations, cattle ranches, and farming settlements witnessed the signing, understanding their own survival depended on fair access to water. The old system died with Kane. Judge Harrison observed, his voice carrying weight of long legal experience. "What you build now will determine whether this territory grows through honest cooperation or tears itself apart through greed and violence." As afternoon shadows lengthened, delegations began arriving from throughout the region: ranchers, miners, farmers, and even territorial officials who wanted to understand how such extensive corruption had flourished unchecked. The story would spread rapidly, carrying implications far beyond Prairie Dawn's boundaries. Henderson, the gruff foreman from Sand Hills Mining District, approached Nellie with hat in weathered hands. "Miss Hart wants you to know we appreciate what you've done. Kane was bleeding us dry with fees nobody could afford long term." "Water rights come with responsibilities," she replied, understanding her response would be carried back to mining camps. "We'll work together to ensure fair access without damaging the resource." By evening, new system was functioning with surprising efficiency. Weekly meetings would address usage schedules and resolve conflicts before they escalated. Nellie and Chaska would serve as neutral arbiters, their partnership legally recognized and practically essential. Standing beside Mud Creek, as sun-painted sky and familiar frontier colors, Nellie realized how completely she'd changed. The frightened Eastern girl who'd stepped off the stage was gone forever, replaced by someone harder, wiser, and infinitely more capable of frontier leadership. But most profound change was internal. She'd learned to trust others completely, to rely on their strength when her own proved insufficient. More surprisingly, she'd discovered others could depend on her judgment and determination when crisis demanded leadership. "Your father would be proud," Chaska said quietly, his voice carrying weight of someone who'd known William Hart personally. "I hope so," she replied, feeling full responsibility of inherited legacy. He left quite a foundation to build on. "Not just water rights," Chaska observed, studying her face in evening light. "The alliances you built, the courage you found, the enemies you made by standing for what's right. You've become the woman he hoped you'd be." The compliment meant more than all legal victories and recovered property combined. In Chaska's steady, dark eyes, she saw a reflection of her own transformation. From victim to victor, someone worthy of trust her father had placed in both of them. Resolution and final surprise. July 25th, 1880. 1 week later, Prairie Dawn had begun resembling actual frontier community rather than criminal enterprise masquerading as legitimate business. Dr. Whitcomb had established permanent practice in converted freight shed, complete with proper equipment ordered from Denver. Miss Lavinia Pike had expanded school curriculum to include practical subjects like water management and conflict resolution. Martha and Victor Kane spent their final days helping with school operations while awaiting their aunt's arrival. Both had gained weight and lost haunted expressions, marking them as victims of systematic abuse. Aunt Margaret says Denver has real schools with libraries. Martha confided to Nellie during morning walk beside Mud Creek. But I'll miss learning about water rights and fair dealing. Write to us about what you're learning, Nellie promised. We'll tell you how things progress here. The legal framework for managing Mud Creek had evolved into something unprecedented cooperative system balancing competing interests through negotiation rather than intimidation. Weekly meetings addressed usage schedules and resolved conflicts before they could escalate into violence. On this particular morning, Nellie and Chaska had decided to conduct final search through Kane's abandoned ranch house, hoping to locate any remaining evidence of his criminal activities. The building stood empty, its contents being inventoried by territorial authorities prior to public auction. Behind Kane's massive desk, they discovered wall safe built into stone foundation hiding place, so secure even federal marshals had missed it. The combination lock yielded to patient observation, revealing numbers Kane had scratched into desk's underside for reference. Inside lay documents providing final pieces of puzzle that had consumed Nellie's life for 2 months. First was her father's personal journal missing since his death and presumed lost. The leather-bound book contained detailed records of his business dealings, personal observations about territorial politics, and complete story of his relationship with Chaska's band. March 20th, 1880. Nellie read aloud, voice trembling, as she absorbed her father's final thoughts. Have received disturbing reports about Kane's financial difficulties and growing interest in Eleanor's inheritance. Fear he may attempt coercion when she arrives. Have therefore executed emergency provisions naming Chaska as steward until Eleanor reaches majority. The entry continued with details painting vivid picture of William Hart's growing concern about his daughter's safety and careful preparations to protect her inheritance. Chaska proved his character during February 1876 blizzard. Found me unconscious 15 miles from shelter, carried me to safety despite personal risk, then recovered my stolen mare from thieves who would have killed him without hesitation. Man of absolute integrity and proven courage. If something happens before Eleanor arrives, he will protect what is rightfully hers. But beneath journal lay even more significant discovery-sealed envelope addressed to Nellie in her father's handwriting, along with copies of legal documents bearing official territorial seals proving their authenticity. The letter was dated 3 days before William Hart's death. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then my fears about Kane have proven justified. The enclosed documents were filed with territorial and federal authorities, but I suspect Kane has bribed postal officials to prevent delivery. The partnership deed establishes formal cooperation between our family and Chaska's band regarding Mud Creek waters, recognizing both legal ownership and traditional usage rights. This arrangement protects both communities while ensuring proper stewardship. I have deposited detailed records of Kane's criminal activities with federal authorities in Denver, including evidence of bank fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy. These records will be released automatically if anything happens to you or Chaska during next 2 years. Additionally, I have discovered Kane's connection to Territorial Postal Supervisor James Morrison, who has been intercepting government mail for substantial bribes. Morrison's arrest should follow shortly after Kane's exposure, leading to broader investigation of territorial corruption. Trust Chaska as you would trust me. He has earned that trust through actions transcending racial prejudice and social convention. Together, you can build something better than what we found here. Your loving father, William Hart. The partnership deed was precisely as described, legal document establishing joint stewardship of Mud Creek between Hart family and Chaska's band, with shared benefits and responsibilities, protecting both communities while preventing future conflicts. but letters referenced to Postal Supervisor Morrison provided crucial intelligence. Federal marshals acting on Hart's deposited evidence arrested Morrison that very afternoon, uncovering network of corruption extending throughout territorial government. "He planned for everything," Nellie said softly, voice carrying mixture of grief and profound gratitude. "Even corruption he wouldn't live to see personally. Your father thought beyond his own lifetime." Chaska replied, studying partnership deed carefully. "Planned for problems he'd never witness, prepared solutions for people he'd never meet." That afternoon, they filed partnership deed with Tom, who recorded it with meticulous attention, replacing his former corruption. Judge Harrison, conducting business from temporary courthouse in Peterson's store, pronounced it legally sound under both territorial and federal law. "Most comprehensive arrangement I've encountered." He admitted legal experience, evident in how he analyzed each provision. Joint stewardship with shared governance, mutual protection, and built-in conflict resolution. Your father was thinking decades ahead. As they walked back toward Mud Creek in early evening light, full significance of day's discoveries settled over them like comfortable blanket. Water rights that had caused so much violence were now protected by partnerships serving both communities' long-term interests. "What does this mean for us personally?" Nellie asked as they reached Creek Bank where their alliance had first formed. "Means we're official partners now." Chaska replied, practically tone carrying warmth beyond mere business arrangements. "Legal partners in managing water, working together by your father's design rather than just because circumstances forced us together." Summer thunderstorm approached from western mountains, same type of weather that had driven them to shelter during their first desperate flight. Without discussion, they took refuge under covered porch of Thornton's mercantile same building where they'd once hidden from Kane's pursuing forces. Rain drummed against tin roof and created rivulets in street's dusty surface, washing settlement clean and filling air with fresh scent, meaning life in arid country. Storm was brief, but intense, transforming landscape in minutes. As thunder moved toward eastern horizon and rain gentled to steady whisper, Nellie found herself studying Chaska's profile, in gray light, filtering through storm clouds. His calm competence, quiet strength, and unwavering reliability qualities her father had recognized and valued years before she'd understood their significance. "Partners." She said testing word, and finding it carried implications she was finally ready to acknowledge. "Partners." He agreed, turning to meet her eyes with intensity, acknowledging everything they'd shared and discovered about each other. When storm passed and they stepped back onto muddy street, they walked side by side toward creek that was now officially theirs to protect and share. Behind them, Prairie Dawn continued transformation from Kane's corrupt company town to genuine community built on honest relationships and mutual respect. At Creek's edge, they found Martha and Victor playing with other children, their laughter carrying across a water like music. Miss Lavinia supervised from Cottonwood Shade, her features softened by contentment and meaningful work satisfaction. Future stretched ahead full of challenges, requiring constant attention and shared effort. Water rights would continue generating conflicts, territorial development would create new pressures, and partnership between settler and Lakota communities would need continuous nurturing to remain effective. But standing beside Mud Creek, with evening sun breaking through storm clouds to paint sky in gold and crimson, both Nellie and Chaska understood they had discovered something more valuable than legal documents or property ownership. They had found each other through circumstances testing and proving their individual characters, and in doing so had fulfilled William Hart's deepest hope, that his daughter would find someone worthy of absolute trust, someone who would stand beside her through whatever challenges frontier might bring. Partnership deed was signed and recorded. Water flowed clear and steady toward distant horizons. And in Prairie Dawn, honest people were finally free to build honest lives based on mutual respect rather than fear and corruption. As they walked home together through evening shadows, Nellie felt her father's presence in every step toward future he'd planned, but would never see future built on partnership, trust, and understanding that some bonds transcend accidents of birth to create families of choice and commitment. The water would flow, the partnership would endure, and in years to come, their story would be told. As example of what frontier justice could accomplish when good people chose to stand together against corruption and violence.